Good evening. How are we doing, guys? Right. I know I was supposed to make a video yesterday, but I'm working on African time. As you understand, we Africans work on African time, so I'm on African time. However, I thought it better for me to come and speak about it today, so that we can be able to get some context to what it is that I'm talking about. So in Zimbabwe currently, we are all looking forward to developing as a nation. We're all looking forward to our elections. We want the elections to give us an outcome. Some people want MDC to win, MDC to go forward. I see you guys. Good evening, guys. Milk, what's up, man? Sean, Talma, Ajaura, Gono, Tabani, how's you, bro? Gladys, great to see you guys. All right, I don't want to make this long, so let me go cut straight to the chase. So we're all looking for progress in Zimbabwe. We are hoping that the elections that are going to come are going to give us an outcome irrespective of who it is that we support. So those that are supporting Mnangagwa are hoping that Mnangagwa will win. He'll get his legitimacy. After getting his legitimacy, he is able to become a president that can serve the nation. Others are hoping that Nelson Chamisa shall come in, and if Nelson Chamisa shall come in, then we shall be able to have development in Zimbabwe, and we pick up this country that has fallen and take it to its glory. All these are the wishes, the dreams that people have on different sides. The youth are excited because they're expecting some form of a change. Mugabe is gone, because Zimbabweans have always seen Mugabe as the problem. So a lot of people believe Mugabe is gone, and because he's gone, everything is going to come right. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is everything going to come right? The euphoria that we are under right now shall end in the same way that you used to have a euphoria in November for EDs coming in. You thought ED was going to work miracles. We're still basically in the same position that we were. We've still got queues. We've still got an economy that is not working, no jobs, because in the real world, things do not change overnight. So now, we've got to ask ourselves, are things going to change after the elections? If an MDC government comes in, will things change? If Emmerson Mnangagwa remains and he wins, and the world says, yes, he's won, will things change? The truth of the matter is I don't believe that things will change. And I don't believe that the things will change because the situations that caused Zimbabwe not to move forward during Mugabe's tenure will still be haunting us now when we go into a new dispensation. And the issue that was haunting us during Mugabe's tenure was the issue of land. It has never changed. And what you need to also understand is that the issue of land didn't start plaguing Zimbabwe in only 1999. The issue of land is the reason we went to the bush, and it was plaguing us even when we were in the bush. Now, a lot of people don't understand what that means, but everything about Zimbabwe is intertwined. Ever since it was born, it's intertwined with our land issue. Whenever we want our land to give back to our people, which is the reason we went to the bush, we always clash with the powers of the world because of that issue. During 1980, when we got our independence, we clashed because they did not want to pay for the land that was taken in a crime against humanity called colonialism. They didn't want to pay for the land. They wanted Zimbabweans to pay for land that had been taken by Rhodesians, land that they had benefited from, and Zimbabwe was supposed to pay for that land. Well, there was a bit of an argument at Lancaster. The British put a bit of pressure, and eventually an agreement that was midway was gotten where Zimbabwe would pay for half, and the United Kingdom and other international allies would pay for the other half. What we always forget as Zimbabweans, like how Vana Mugabe did not realize, is that yes, you can make these agreements where you think you've made a compromise on how to get what your stolen property back, right? You can make this compromise with the West and say, okay, I'll pay half. But it's easier to say you pay half without knowing half of what. It's easier to say I'll compensate for land without knowing the value of that land. So when we got independence, we made a deal with the devil, accepting that we were going to pay for our own land, at least 50% of it, and the British will pay for the other 50. But when we agreed to this deal, the British said that we must pay for this land, the one we're going to buy from ex-Britons or British descendants or white farmers as we call them. We were supposed to buy this land from that illegal occupation by paying it in foreign currency. We had to come up with 50%. The British would come up with the other 50%. We meet halfway and we pay for the land. But in the beginning when we were negotiating, no one knew what the price of all the land would be. And the value of the land from 1980, when we're coming out of a war, continued to rise all the way through into the 90s to a point where the Zimbabwean government didn't have enough money to pay for that land. As part of that agreement, Zimbabwe had made a reconciliation agreement with the British. Instead of the British paying for reparations, so that we can be able to put up all those facilities that they never built for our people for the 90 years we were occupied, they said, no, we'll give you loans. We'll give you donor funds. We will help you. If you reconcile with your white farmers, if you pay for half and you don't expect us to pay for everything, we will partner you into building a better Zimbabwe. We will build it together. You understand? The liberation fighters, they were fooled enough to believe that, and they believed it. So they accepted to pay. To pay for this, they would have to use foreign currency or the surplus of foreign currency that we'll be able to generate in our trade agreements. So the British were even willing to trade with us. The Americans were willing to trade with us. Europe was willing to trade with us because they wanted us to generate foreign currency that we were going to use to do what? To pay white farmers our 50%. The British also said that they will not put up a 50% until Zimbabwe has its 50%. Then they will put their 50%. So Zimbabwe had to have its money first to buy any white land before the British would give it money. Now, this is the same situation that Zimbabwe is in now. The British government is sitting and negotiating with the very same Mnangagwa and anyone else who's going to come in power, and they're saying, if you want us to be able to give you any loans to develop Zimbabwe, if you want us to take off the sanctions, if you want us to allow you back into the international community, you must do two things first. You must pay for the money that you currently owe the financial lending institutions of the world. That's about 7 billion. After you've paid that 7 billion, you must make a commitment and make payments for land that you took to white farmers. We are exactly back in Lancaster again. And why are we going to cooperate with them? Because we believe that we are going to develop as soon as we do what the British are asking us to do. But the question we must ask ourselves is, did we, in the beginning, at Lancaster, when we accepted their terms of reconciliation, of them not paying reparations, and of them not paying for all the buying of the land from their children, and reconciling so that we could do well, did we do well? The truth of the matter is we did not do well. Zimbabwe got into some serious financial problems, serious debt issues. Why did Zimbabwe get into serious debt issues? They got into serious debt issues because they didn't have the money to raise up a new Zimbabwe. A Zimbabwe that didn't have housing for black people. A Zimbabwe for 90 years that neglected black education. A Zimbabwe for all its life when it was Rhodesia that never built sanitation, never built roads, bridges in the rural areas. It did not have money to develop itself, so it had to borrow that money from the financial lending institutions. After 8 years of borrowing and using our surplus to buy land, Zimbabwe was almost destitute in 1988 because all our money was going to buy farmland, put our 50% that is going to buy a farm with the other 50% coming from England and her other donor friends. And every time the white farmers were escalating the value of their farms, whenever there's a demand for something, while government was putting a huge demand on the requirement for land, the price of land kept going up. It was also being artificially put up because they were trying to discourage the government from affording to pay for that land. So, we ended up in a situation where we were now bankrupt. We needed to borrow more money from the IMF, from the lending institutions of the world. We had no more money to build schools, no more money to keep developing Zimbabweans, no more money to keep building houses. All this education that we brag about, all this development that you saw in Zimbabwe, the teachers' colleges, the medical schools, the nursing colleges were being built because of loans. But we were the ones taking a loan to develop our people, while all the money that we were generating was used to buy land and pay white farmers in foreign currency. Until it got to a point where our liberation fighters discovered that they'd been given a raw deal. But even though they'd been given a raw deal, they still decided to cooperate. Now you have to understand why it was a raw deal. You cannot have a situation where you're oppressed for 92 years. Then you get independence. You have to fight for this independence. You have to fight an illegal occupier of your land. You've got to fight somebody that is colonizing you, which is illegal according to the UN rules by the time we got into 1960. But this person doesn't pay you reparations. This person doesn't pay you damages. But they've been sucking your soil for its resources, sucking your labor and making you slaves without paying salaries. You are a people that were never paid for anything that these people took, but you didn't charge them reparations. But when you want to recover your country, they want you to borrow the money from their institutions. And after borrowing the money from their institutions, when you owe their institutions, they never say, okay, we'll forget about the debt in the name of reconciliation. We'll forget about all the money you've used to build schools, and we're only going to charge you for the money you used to buy cars or something. They didn't do that. They continued to hold Zimbabwe accountable for its debts, but they were forgiven for reparations. They continued to force Zimbabwe to pay for farms that they had taken, that the Rhodesians did not own, because Zimbabwe wanted reconciliation. They were desperate to be with this friendship with the United Kingdom and the Europeans. It got to a point where the Europeans themselves, the British, reneged on the agreement. The Blair government came in 1997 and they said, we are not the Margaret Thatcher government, we are not going to pay for this land. We have run out of money to pay land. Now, isn't it interesting that Mugabe had not said that we don't have money to pay anymore? He still wanted to pay, even though it was costing us a lot of money. Even though it's the reason we went into ESAP, the British are the ones that said we're not going to pay anymore. And when they said that, they expected the Zimbabwean government to accept that and stop taking land, or if they decide to continue to take land, they must still pay for the land, including the 50% of the British. Mugabe said that's nonsense. And that's how they got into the point where we are now, where he said that's nonsense, and the IMF stopped lending Zimbabwe money. It stopped lending Zimbabwe money. Yes, it gave issues to say that it was the Congolese war, but it stopped giving Zimbabwe money. The plan was to stop Zimbabwe from taking land, to stop Zimbabwe from having the money to pay for any new land. At the same time, the white farmers were now escalating the prices of this very same land so that Zimbabwean government could not afford it. Mugabe said it's simple. We went to war to fight for this land. So we are not going to stop taking land because the British have refused to pay for their children's land. We will take our land. Then the British must worry about the Rhodesians. We are not going to worry about them. You don't keep your end of the bargain, we won't keep our end of the bargain. So that put Zimbabwe into sanctions. That created problems for Zimbabwe. They had to kill this country that decided to take land without paying farmers. Now you need to understand what I'm trying to put across here. There was never an intention for the British to allow Zimbabwe to take land. That was the issue. And now that we've taken land, we are under sanctions. And for those sanctions to go away, we have to compensate all the farmers that lost their land. And we think anything between 2,000 and 3,000 white farmers lost their land. So we must compensate those white farmers. Now, our new constitution says that we can only compensate in a certain way. Those ones who were Rhodesians, those ones who were ex-white farmers, who lost their land, and who lost their land by the time that Zimbabwe started gazetting the farms that will be taken, those people shall not be given compensation for land. They'll be given compensation for what? For developments made on their land. Then there are those white people who came into Zimbabwe to invest in farmland, to buy farmland, with agreements that were made between the Zimbabwe government and their European governments to make sure that the tenure of these white people who buy this land to farm on it would be protected and guaranteed by the government. So those people who came from Germany, from Italy, with agreements that came between the Italian government and the Zimbabwean government, who lost their land, will get full compensation. They'll get compensation for the land, and they'll get compensation for the developments on the land, because they spent money to buy the land and they spent money for the developments. Then there's another class of people, some black people who could have lost their land in the process. Those will also get full compensation. But here's where the problem is. Now that we've got this new constitution spelling that out, we've got white farmers that are saying, no, our agreement is not binding to this new constitution. Our agreement is binding according to the rules that were made at Lancaster, number one, and also according to a ruling that was given by the SADC Tribunal. The SADC Tribunal said that the Zimbabwe land program was illegal, and that Zimbabwe must compensate and pay white farmers for land that they stole. That's what our SADC Tribunal said. Now, some of you may be wondering, how can a SADC Tribunal say that? Of course it will say that. Who is SADC? Who is inside SADC? South Africa is one of the countries in SADC, and it's a colonized country. The law that we use is a law of Europeans. We use Roman Dutch law, English law, international precedents. Even our constitution is like that. So those laws are never equipped to look out for white, black interests or African interests. So we still have a maintenance of colonialism happening. So now, whoever's going to take over, be it Chamisa or Mnangagwa, the United States government has just amended and made changes to the Zidera Act. And in that Zidera Act, they've put a requisition that the issues and the judgments that were given by the SADC Tribunal must be considered in the payment of compensation. So this brings us now to what people like Eddie Cross are saying. People like Eddie Cross are saying that, yes, you must compensate. White farmers are waiting for compensation. And the figures that they're talking about, people like Eddie Cross, are anything between $7 billion and $15 billion that Zimbabweans must pay for land. Now, while your constitution is saying only developments, only improvements, and then paying the farmers, the people who come from countries that had contracts with Zimbabwe, the figure is coming out to 7 to 15 billion. And other people are saying that it might rise even more than that. This is reminiscent of that very same escalation of land from 1980 all the way to 1997 that was happening, with white farmers continuing to escalate the prices of their land, and Britain insisting that they must be paid, and they must be paid in foreign currency, even though she could not carry her own end of the bargain to pay. So, Mnangagwa or Chamisa are not going to be able to take Zimbabwe forward before they come up with an agreement in writing to ensure that they pay these white farmers, to ensure that they pay the $7 billion that is already outstanding, that is owed to the international financial institutions. So Zimbabwe cannot go forward before it deals with these monies. And so I'm going to put that figure to say, let's take the $7 billion that is owed currently to the financial institutions, and let's just say, for argument's sake, that the money that is owed to the white farmers is only $7 billion. Remember, it can go up to 15 billion. But 7 and 7, we get 14 billion. So with $14 billion that Zimbabwe must clear, before you can get lent money to fix your hospitals, before you can get lent money to fix your schools, before you can start having money to do anything that lifts your country to 2018 levels, you must pay 14 billion. Right? Now, I'm hearing some of you saying, okay, just pay it so that we can move forward. No, it doesn't go so quickly. Remember, we had a debt before. And this debt we failed to pay, that's why IMF cut us off. Right? That debt was 7 billion. The 7 billion that we still have, yes, it has been going up and down, but we bought about 7 billion that we have failed to pay in 23 years. We have failed to pay 7 billion in 23 years. We failed to clear the debt of IMF, World Bank, Development Bank in 23 years. And that money that we've been owing is nothing more than 10 billion. We failed to pay it in 23 years. So now if we accept a debt of 14 billion, which includes the payment of white farmers, where will you get that money from and how many years will it take you to pay it? And remember, Zidera can be removed, sanctions can be removed only after a solution to these debts, the white debt and the previous debt, have been created. The international lending institutions will only start giving us money when we also wipe out the debt that we owe them. So how long will it take you to clear 14 billion? How long will it take Chamisa to clear that? How long will it take Mnangagwa to clear that? How long will it take any other leader, Mujuru, to clear that? And remember, these whites have never forgiven any Zimbabwean debt, so don't assume they're going to say, let's just forget about 14 billion. It doesn't work like that. The reason they give you this debt is so that you pay it. So, what are the options that will be left to these governments? The options that will be left to these governments is to mortgage resources. To go to them and say, listen here, we don't have money to pay this money, but what we can do is we've got resources. So we can give these resources. The international monetary institutions do not take your resources. Don't be lied. They will tell you to sell those resources on the market. They will even tell you the people that are potential buyers of your resources or the concessions. Right? So the first things that they'll tell you to do is to sell your parastatals. Your electricity utilities, your water utilities, your railways, they'll usually ask you to sell those. Sometimes they'll even ask you to sell your hospitals. Right? When that has happened, still you won't have enough money to pay for the debt. So you have to mortgage more things. And whenever they're going to buy your things to clear debt, they buy them at bottom prices. You are like a person that is selling your TV because you've got a debt. No one is going to buy your TV for its real value. They'll buy it for at least 10% of its value. So now you will now be forced, after privatizing the parastatals, you'll now be left with giving them resources. Because that's the only valuable thing that they know you have. They will then say, we will take your resources. But if we have valued your resources at 30 billion, they'll say, I'm not going to take a risk of 30 billion. I might not find resources, so I'm only going to pay you 3 billion. So now, to secure a debt of 15 billion just to pay the farmers and just to pay what you owe the financial institutions, you might be forced to mortgage resources worth $150 billion. I'm telling you something that's already happened. ZANU-PF was lent $100 million by Ruttenberg. And in return, they gave Ruttenberg platinum concessions that Ruttenberg sold last year for $999 million. So $100 million that was lent to ZANU-PF ended up giving Ruttenberg mineral rights that were sold for 990. So this 10 factor of 10 is correct. It's already been proved. So they'll say to you, okay, if you want us to give you the 15 billion or to guarantee the 15 billion, you've got to give us resources that are worth 150 billion. Now the question is, does Zimbabwe have resources worth 150 billion? Do we have those resources? No one knows because we haven't done a resource audit. Mnangagwa is busy making a big deal out of signing $3 billion lithium, a $4 billion platinum deals. It makes me wonder just how much we've got if we're thinking that 4 billion is a lot of money when we're going to have a debt of 15 billion to cover. Right. So that's first thing. The second thing, after we've taken these loans, we are still left having paid other people. So we've taken a debt to pay white farmers, taken a debt to pay the world banks over maybe 5 years, 10 years. But we still don't have debt to develop Zimbabwe. We still don't have the money to start building the roads, fixing our hospitals. So people are still dying in the hospitals. People still need electricity in the country. People still need better roads. People still need better schools. So we are left with having taken a debt of 15 billion that we mortgaged resources worth 150 billion. Now we need money to develop Zimbabwe. I'll take Shamisa's figure. He's saying we need 15 billion just to bring Zimbabwe to speed. Not to make it ultra advanced, to bring it to speed. No high-speed trains, because a high-speed train alone, just for 200 kilometers, will cost us 10 billion. So we don't have the money for the high-speed trains. So we're now going to have need for 14 or 15 billion, according to Chamisa, just to bring Zimbabwe to par, to standard, to 2018 levels. And remember, it's not going to happen overnight, so it might take another 10 years for us to build this Zimbabwe to 2018 levels. So we need that 15 billion debt on top of the 14 to now take us to 2018 levels of infrastructure development. In there, we might have corruption taking some of the money. We're eating it as we go. It doesn't matter who's going to come in, ZANU-PF or MDC. You are guaranteed that whatever loans we're going to take, some of it is going to be eaten by our politicians. That's what they do. So now we need to mortgage more resources for this 15 billion. If we go to the same people that have already mortgaged us, they'll say to us, you know the deal. We need 15 billion times 10 in terms of resources, or what we call concessions for resources, for us to give you 15 billion or to guarantee you 15 billion. Right? So now we've mortgaged $300 billion worth of resources to be able just to get Zimbabwe to a standard where we've got better roads, better schools, better hospitals, a functional country. Do we have those resources? Do we have $300 billion worth of resources? The bottom line of what I'm saying to you, ladies and gentlemen, is Zimbabwe does not have the resources to pay white farmers as we speak. We probably don't have the resources and the money to even pay our debt as we speak. We don't have $14 billion to build Zimbabwe, to bring it up. This is what the new leader in Zimbabwe is going to inherit. There are some of these that can't be avoided. The one that can't be avoided is us paying debts that we took. We have to pay those. There is no question mark. But we can definitely do something about paying white farmers for land they stole. And after we got independence, we were never given reparations. We were never given damages. Do you know that some of these white farmers who are complaining were not farming on the land? They had mines on the land that were not registered with the government. They were busy mining gold and diamonds. Chiadzwa itself had people who were mining there for 10, 20 years before we discovered that there were diamonds there. These people were getting rich off our land. They never paid damages. They never paid taxes for all what they were getting out of that land, but they want compensation. Some of these white Rhodesian farmers have got malls in South Africa. Malls. I don't know if you understand what a mall is. That's how rich they are. They've got malls here. They built those malls because of gold, diamonds, and resources that they were getting out of their farms, pretending to be farming. They would plant maize around and say that they were farming. I'm not speaking something I don't know. My business partner, I had a business partner who went to Peterhouse here in South Africa. Their farm had gold, and he keeps laughing and he says, we grew maize around the farm so that we could mine in the middle. Then every time they would fly with their private, they have a little jet, they would fly the gold to South Africa. It's still happening on some farms in Zimbabwe as I speak to you. So those people are the ones who are compensating. Wealth that you will never get again. wealth that was taken out of your soil, your resources, your reserves, that you will never get again. These are the same people who today in England and in Canada, they're holding maps, books upon books of maps that show where the resources in Zimbabwe are. They know where every single mineral in our country lies, and we don't know that those maps were taken out of the government when they left. That's why they want to put pressure on Zimbabwean government to not be able to pay these white farmers, so that they are forced to give back land, to give back mineral resource rights, because they know what's in Zimbabwe in the maps that they're holding overseas. Now, Zimbabwe, no matter who takes over, they're not going to be allowed not to pay that money. They're not going to be let off the hook not to pay the white farmers, because the issue is they want our government to say we can't afford it. And once they say that, it's about resources. So what's the deal? What do we do? What are the options? I made a video last year talking about how we need to start utilizing the systems and processes of the legal mechanisms, these Western legal mechanisms, these ones that they call international law, but quite frankly, they are colonial law, they're European law. We've got to start using them to fight some of these things. And this starts with us raising this issue into the public domain, that even though the world has got international law that says that when there is an occupation that is illegal, if people fight for their freedom, and sometimes you don't even have to fight for their freedom, that land that is occupied illegitimately or illegally should be returned to the people that it belongs to without any condition. Not only that, there must be compensation, reparations, and damages for whatever unjust benefits that have been acquired from owning that land, or the losses that have been made by the people. That precedent exists from the First World War, the Second World War, the Israel issue, and many other cases. There are conventions. There are what do we call these resolutions by the UN that talk to issues like this. Our politicians do not insist on the maintenance of the precedents that have been created by these conventions and by these resolutions and precedents of previous cases. They like to negotiate and give favors, political favors, to these European countries, and that's wrong. Another problem that we have is that our leaders are put under subjugation, under duress when they're negotiating this. But this is what our Constitution says here. I'm going to read you something quickly. Right, so our Constitution, in the preamble of our Constitution, says, united by our diversity, our common desire for freedom, justice, equality, and our heroic resistance to colonialism, racism, and all forms of domination and oppression. We are a country that says that we believe in freedom. It's in our Constitution. We believe in justice. But how do we believe in justice while still making contracts, while still making agreements with the world that go against the justice or the precedents of justice that has been set at international law? Why are our leaders still accepting compensation of an occupier instead of an occupier paying damages? It's in the international law precedents. Why are we accepting things that go against justice? Why are we accepting things like the racism that is there? That Zimbabwe has got many things in its constitution. It's got many duties in its constitution to take care of the disabled, to provide social welfare, to provide free education for primary schools together with high schools, to build houses for its people. Do you understand? These are the obligations of our government in the Constitution. It's not meeting these obligations. They have the responsibility of creating entrepreneurial opportunities, of facilitating them, empowering the youth. All these are obligations that they are not upholding. But while they are not upholding these obligations, they are being told by the Americans and the British that the important obligation to hold right now is the compensation of land. But is the compensation of land the most important of all the needs that our government has, considering that some of these needs it hasn't been able to offer them since the beginning of our independence? And if our government has got a constitution that is supposed to empower its people and can't empower these people because it has got no money, and it has no money because it was a colony, why is it that reparations are not part and parcel of our constitution? And then how do we talk about racial equality when our government is going to pay white farmers first for land that was lost in 1999? But their needs, people who don't have homes, people who don't have property, war veterans that are still destitute, people that don't really have good schools that have been outstanding since 1980. Tell me how that works. Tell me how our constitution jumps to take care of white needs but never takes care of the black needs. How does it work? And they talk about fighting all forms of domination and oppression. We are currently under sanctions that have been instituted by a political party in our country. How did that happen? And yet our constitution's preamble refuses that. Now, these are the important things that we've got to talk about, because even these Chamisas who have created this environment, when they get into power, they'll realize that the West was never their friend. The same way Mugabe and his crew thought they would negotiate and refused to make them pay reparations because they were friends, realized that they were not friends. So when Chamisa gets in, they will get to see that these people are not friends. Even though they helped us create sanctions, Chamisa will then be speaking against the very same West because they'll be now kicking him in the balls. For now, it's about getting into power. They're going to get into power. But when you're in power, you want to deliver. They are not going to be able to deliver because the very same people that they're making deals with will say, hey, pay our farmers. Hey, borrow money, give us resources. So now we need to work on a petition. A petition that starts to make sure that we create this issue to be a public discussion in the British media, the British blogosphere. And when I say media, I'm not talking mainstream media. When you create a buzz on an issue, it can become an issue outside the mainstream media, online, in blogs, in Twitter discussions, social media discussions. That's what we need to do as Zimbabweans. Otherwise, we are being left in a situation where we don't have an option but to give all our resources and possibly even the land to match the debts that are going to accrue, and of which 50% of the debts that we need to accrue are not even to take care of us as a people. They're not to give education to your brothers and sisters. They're not to create an environment that's going to create jobs. They're not to create infrastructure that's going to allow companies to come in and start flourishing. We're going to be people who've just paid 14 billion to white farmers and to the banks that we owe, but we're still left in the very same position that we were. But we've lost 150 billion worth of resources and we've paid white people in the process. Then even if we do, guys, I don't know what to say. I just wish we could understand this issue and how tricky it is and why we need to pay attention to it much more than we're paying attention to who we're going to elect. Who we're going to elect has got no power because Zimbabwe is actually not being run by Zimbabweans. It's being run by those countries that have sanctions on us. And to make it worse, the Zidera amendments that have been made, they have now included Australia, Britain, Canada in Zidera. Zidera used to be an American law. But now today, the Australians have been put in there, the British have been put in there, the Canadians have been put in there. They're now part and parcel of this Zidera agreement. So we cannot make an agreement with England that is divorced from Zidera. And Zidera is saying, England is saying, pay according to what your constitution says. America is saying, no, pay according to what the SADC tribunal said. Pay these damages, pay this compensation according to what the SADC tribunal says. If I understand the SADC tribunal well, I'm still to read more of it. It wants the farmer to be paid for the land. Your country is broke right now. Where is it going to pay it from? Where are they going to get the money from? The country has got no money. It can't even run hospitals. It can't even pay civil servants. Where is the money going to come from? And remember, whatever debt we're going to take, we're also possibly going to take debt just to keep the country running, to pay our soldiers, to pay our, our civil servants, to keep the hospitals running, not building new hospitals, not buying machinery, not buying new beds. So we need a petition in which we say to the British government, stop putting pressure on our government to pay your colonizers, your settlers that were occupying our land illegitimately. Stop using sanctions to push our government, which has no money, into more debt when it doesn't even afford to pay 7 billion in 23 years. Stop instituting what we call neocolonialism. And after we've done those petitions, we need to be able to make sure this issue is discussed in our own parliament. How are they talking about, why are we hearing figures of 7 billion, 15 billion? Why are people as knowledgeable as people like Eddie Cross saying that? What are we going to do about the SADC tribunal ruling? What are we going to do about these demands that are being made by the new Zidera Act? After we've done that, we need to also start looking at our own legal minds, starting to challenge some of the international law precedents that is there, challenging some of these mechanisms that are making Zimbabwe pay damages and compensation for land that was stolen. This concept of us not being paid reparations, we need our lawyers to challenge that and to start also writing new recommendations for changes to international law. International law is not just created by treaties. It's not just created by resolutions reached in the UN, or it's also created by people making submissions. Obviously, those submissions have to be reviewed, but Africans have not contributed to this process. It has been European law consistently since the beginning of time. So we've been using colonial laws, the same laws that colonized us. Because you need to understand that the international laws that have been created in the world right now come from the time that the League of Nations was created. Some even go before that, and they come all the way until the United Nations was created. But all these institutions were created before Africa got independence. African countries were still colonies by the time that a lot of the international laws were made. And when we got independence, no real new laws were created. They were only adding the treaties that we made. So a lot of the treaties that we negotiated under duress from our colonial masters became part of international law. But they're unjust, obviously, if they're going to be created on the premise of colonization. But where are our lawyers challenging those things? Where are our lawyers asking for the creation of new laws for previously colonized countries so that they can derive justice and they can derive emancipation that is going to be fair? Right. I now need to read some of what you guys are saying. I'll go back to the top. Guys, this is a serious issue, because if you don't take things like this seriously and you worry about Chamisa coming to power, Mnangagwa maintaining power, without looking at the mechanisms of what's going to affect us, we are back in 1980. We were all happy about a new independent Zimbabwe without knowing the implications of what it is that they had negotiated, without not knowing how the land was going to be bought, without asking how the schools were going to be built, without asking how we're going to remedy and fix every single thing that the British government neglected when it was colonizing us. And you must remember, when the British government was colonizing us, it had a responsibility to provide basic human services that it did not provide. So it needs to be accountable, and it needs to, but we didn't create those mechanisms in the law. And they're not going to create those mechanisms for us because they were not colonies. But our lawyers, where are they? What are they doing? What are they asking and contributing into the proposals for new international laws? And then our leaders. Mnangagwa is not going to talk about all the things I'm talking about. He just wants to be in power. He doesn't care about all these things. He doesn't care if Zimbabwe incurs huge debt. He's going to be a president. He's going to be living large. He's going to be comfortable. This is the problem with our leaders. They don't care about you. Chamisa is not talking about these things too. You don't hear him talking about this because he doesn't care about you too. He just wants to be a president. Mugabe was exactly the same when we got independence. He just wanted to be in power. So when the UK said, we won't give you independence if you guys want us to pay reparations, you can go back to the bush. They were not willing to go back to the bush. So they decided to say, okay, Nelson Mandela in South Africa, same thing. When he started asking for the emancipation of black people, he said, listen, we'll send you back to Robben Island. Either you accept what we're saying or you go back to Robben Island. Mandela didn't want to go to Robben Island. And with Mugabe, what they said to them is that you go back to the bush, but you're not going back to Zambia because we told Zambia not to take you. You're not going back to Mozambique because we told Mozambique not to take you. You're not going back to Tanzania because we told Tanzania not to take you. So you're going to go back to another country, maybe Malawi, and start your war from there. So if our leaders don't care, we've got to care. We've got to do the petitions. Because sometimes the British public are not aware of what it is that their government is doing. This is why now you've got hearings about Tony Blair lying to the British people about the fact that his nation, there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction, and this is what the British public are now being told. But they didn't know, so you've got to create the awareness. British people don't know that Zimbabwe is being let to die in debt because of sanctions that have been imposed by its country that wants to control Zimbabwean resources because they are sitting with maps of where the resources are in Zimbabwe. They don't know that. You have to create that awareness. You have to do the petitions. You have to make the noise that goes out in there. So, okay, fine. Mafa, I see you. I think I've told you before, I struggle to take calls. So I'm going to come and try and take your call, but I always fail to take calls on here, but I will try. In the meantime, let me read one or two messages. All right. Whoa. Lona says hello. Hi, guys. All right. I want to look for some juicy stuff here, guys, so I'm going to skip the greetings. Tendai Zengen, he says, the prophet is back. Please don't. All right. Wow, where are the comments, guys? Where are the comments, guys? I don't give you my comments. Chamisa will obviously compensate those guys. You compensate them with what? That's what I want to know. You need to understand that whether you want to compensate them or not, you are not. You don't have the money. So how are you going to compensate? How will you compensate them? We don't have the money. So that means mortgaging the resources. But what I'm bringing to you guys, do you know what mortgaging your resources means? It's like taking your stuff to a pawnbroker. They will take your stuff for free if they can. A ring, a diamond ring that's worth a million rand, $1 million. They will buy it for $10,000. That's what happens when you are mortgaging to pay debts, and they're in cahoots. The lending institutions of the world are controlled by the Western powers. Those Western powers are the ones with the companies that are going to be sent to buy your resources. They'll be speaking, and all of them will come at the same prices. They will not compete for your resources. They will not compete to pay the highest price. They will not have an auction. They will push you down to the lowest prices and you'll be destitute. And if our leaders are so desperate for sanctions to be taken off, they will take whatever. And I'm not talking about something that hasn't happened. It happened in Zambia, what I'm telling you. All the copper mines were bought for a song. And after they were bought for a song, the value of those copper mines jumped by 50 times as soon as they were bought by European companies. Target. But the alternative is countries like Mozambique. What does that mean, countries like Mozambique as the alternative? Hearing you double, she says. Mozambique did not cooperate, and they are 100% of the country, and look at where they are now. South Africa cooperated, and they are moving on. Target locks. Wow, that is crazy. I live in South Africa. So when I hear people like you, ignorant people like you, saying South Africa is moving on, you don't have a clue what you're talking about. South Africa is the richest country in the world with 55% poverty. It's the richest country in the world where people here don't own anything. They don't own land. When a man gets chased from a job in South Africa, he can't go to the village and just grow crops and eat He stays in a shack in South Africa. That's why the violence is so high. Why do you think the rape is so bad? People are under pressure in this country. I get so angry when I hear people who don't know the realities of South Africa speaking like you. And if you're a South African, you are a dumb South African, because this country is destitute. The debt of individuals. People take debt to eat. Mozambique is better than South Africa. They might not have townhouses and highways, but they eat every day because they've got little patches of land. The South African is forced to stay in shacks. That's why they then have to go into crime. That's why when they protest and they have protests, they kill each other. This is why Marikana happened. You have never seen Marikana happen anywhere else in Africa, because when a person loses their job, they go to the village, they'll get support from the family system there, they'll eat, they'll grow crops, they don't need money. In South Africa, you need money, so sometimes you've got to kill another person to eat. That's not life. And this is not just a country, and you must never compare Zimbabwe with South Africa. South Africa is the richest country on earth after Congo. It is damn rich, but the richness is not in South Africa. All they're doing is trying to wipe out all that money. And all this good living you think is happening in South Africa, it's actually these very same Europeans who bring products to suck the little salaries that people are given, or to give them debt to suck the money that they have. Ultimately, a lot of people have no net worth here. A lot of us Zimbabweans, we can't go home, not because we don't want to go home. We don't have the money to afford life in Zimbabwe. We haven't been able to save money, and I'm a business person. We haven't saved. Our houses are on debt, the cars are on debt, everything is debt. So I can't go home. I don't have $1 million to go and establish myself at home. Not because I don't want to, because I can't afford it. But I live a pretty good life. I drive a pretty nice car, but I own nothing. So please, talk things that you know. In Mozambique, there are people with cash. In Zimbabwe, there are people with cash. People own their homes. They own their cars. The Zimbabwean citizen has no debt, but this is the debt they want to put you in now. Target, I'm disappointed, man. Tony T, the British betrayed Rhodesians. How did they betray Rhodesians when they're making sure that the Rhodesians have been getting paid? Zimbabwe has already paid in excess of $140 million. And if we were to factor that in for inflation, you'd find that it's probably billions that was already paid to Rhodesian farmers. So how is that being let down, though? Godi says compensation should not be for only one group of citizens. It should be for citizens of Gukura Hundi, colonization, Murambatsvina. My problem with you is you are reading again those articles that are the act that was written by the Americans. How do you pay for Gukura Hundi before there is a hearing about Gukura Hundi, before there's a commission to discover what really happened in Gukura Hundi? How do we know who killed people in Gukura Hundi? You need to remember that there was Super Zapu being traded in South Africa to destabilize Zimbabwe. How were they destabilizing Zimbabwe if not killing people? And if they were destabilizing Zimbabwe by killing people, which people were killed in Zimbabwe? Who was killed in Zimbabwe by the Gukura Hundi thing? And if so, forces were trained in South Africa to come and destabilize Zimbabwe. And they were destabilizing by killing people. Who were the people that were killed? So how do you ascertain who gets paid reparations and for what? And what is this paying for Murambatsvina and paying for Gukura Hundi, but you never got reparations for an entire war and an entire 92 years of being occupied? You need to stop talking this Western talk and think things through. Murambatsvina, yes, but we still need commissions to determine the culpability and to determine how the criteria of damages must be paid. Same with Gukura Hundi. If a commission finds that the Zimbabwean government is the one that killed those people, yes, damages must be paid. But what happens if a commission finds that the Super Zapu that were being sent by the apartheid government did most of the killings? If they find out that it was the very same Zapu people who were Ndebeles by themselves, killing their own people in order to destabilize the country and find and work their way into power, which is what they did, what does that mean? Because you can't also trust Joshua Nkomo. Joshua Nkomo owned a great pieces of land in Matebele land. How did he buy them? Right, Gladys says, Wanopenga, Rhodesians got their money from Britain. I agree. Robert, and you know, this concept of we must give Rhodesians money. I told you already that Rhodesians were making money from the land agriculturally. They were enslaving your ancestors for 100 years, making money. They were being given subsidies by the Rhodesian government. And you must never think that the Rhodesian government is separate from you. Rhodesian government was our government. It was in our country, taking our resources. It had a responsibility to us. So every time that money was taken to give Rhodesians a better life, that was a misappropriation of funds. It was corruption. It was corruption. When they didn't build schools, it was corruption. All that is also compensation that we deserve. Where is that compensation? Black people are very quick to talk about the compensation of black governments to black people, but they never talk about the compensation of black people by white people who took advantage of them. How are we thinking though? Right. Robert says, I'm neither MDC nor ZANU, but should MDC win, they will no doubt sell our country. Yes, they will sell our country, but I believe Mnangagwa will sell our country too because he's too desperate. Right now, there is no difference between Mnangagwa and MDC. Same WhatsApp group. That's the problem. And not only are they in the same WhatsApp group, they are being pressured by the Europeans and the Americans to make concessions. My problem with Mnangagwa is if he repeats it now, after they did it in Lancaster, after they were duped in Lancaster to accept British terms, and to think that they can take Zimbabwe forward, and they didn't take Zimbabwe forward in the very 37 years that we've had, they must be stupid to make another agreement with the British now, assuming that the removal of sanctions and paying white farmers is going to be able to raise Zimbabwe. These people didn't pay us reparations and they never helped us to build Zimbabwe, yet they say that they were going to help the Zimbabwean government to build Zimbabwe. What the British did is they kept Zimbabwe going just enough for the Zimbabwean government to have enough money to pay its percentage for the farms it wanted. They literally made Zimbabwe work for the benefit of being able to get their white farmers paid for land. That is exactly what they did, because the British government did not ensure that that money was allowed to build schools. That is a travesty. Right. Target says depressing. Godi says we should put pressure on politicians who are saying they will compensate farmers. My problem with Zimbabwean politicians is you never get a more arrogant people like the politicians we've got in Zimbabwe. They don't listen. Mugabe was the same, all right? Now, we're never going to get them to listen, to change. That is the way they are. But what worries me is how can Zimbabwe be compensating white farmers and South Africa sitting here are saying we want to take away the compensation of farmers, number one.